Here's the truth that most creators won't say out loud. Starting a podcast is easy. Designing one that drives leads, builds partnerships, and impacts your bottom line, well, that takes a strategy. This episode is your blueprint. Welcome to Rocky Mountain Marketing. I'm your host, Katie Brinkley. Join us as we dive deep with the world's leading digital marketing experts every single Tuesday. It's all about giving you the strategies that are working right now, directly from those who are making an impact. With my 20 years of experience, I'm here to help you navigate the world of digital marketing. Whether you're looking to sharpen your skills or transform your business, you're in the right place. Let's get started on today's journey to success. Welcome back to this week's episode of Rocky Mountain Marketing. All right, so this episode is going to be about one of my favorite topics, podcasting. Yay! And podcasting is one of my favorite topics because it changed my business. And if you have a podcast that has a strategy behind it, well, it can absolutely change your business when you have a strategy behind it. So if you've ever asked yourself, how do I know if my podcast is actually driving results and helping my business? Well, you're going to love today's episode because today's guest is Megan Dougherty. She is a digital marketing specialist, co-founder of One Stone Creative, and the brain behind the Business Podcast Blueprints and the State of Business Podcasting Report. She's also the author of Podcasting for Business, How to Create a Show That Makes a Bottom Line Difference for Your Company. And she's helped hundreds of business owners across countless industries, not just launch podcasts, but design them with intention. A girl that's after my own heart here. We're talking shorter sales cycles, better referral partnerships, and measurable marketing outcomes. Megan, I am so excited to have you here.
Thank you so much. I've been looking forward to this call all summer.
Yeah, I know, me too. And I mean, this summer has flown by. I mean, it's already at the end of July. I don't know what happened to summer, but as we were talking before I hit record here, summer's gone by way too fast. So let's start talking about podcasting because there's no shortage of people that are starting podcasts these days. But most shows, it seems to fizzle out before they hit episode 10. What is the biggest misconception that you see when business owners launch a podcast?
Yeah, I think that the biggest misconception that business owners have around podcasting is it's just that there is a certain way that a podcast has to be for it to be a podcast. Right. So you say podcast to someone and they think, okay, it's going to be two people. It's going to release every week. It's going to have sponsors. And that's kind of the idea of the podcast that people have. But it can be so much more and it can do so many different things when you start to think of it as like, this is a marketing tool that I can make do different things in the business. So I think that's a really common issue that plagues a lot of people when they get started.
Yeah, I can't even begin to tell you how many people think that is like, well, yeah, I'm going to have a co-host and we're going to do it every single week and it's going to be an hour long. And and I think that a lot of people think that podcasting is just going to magically drive leads in on autopilot. Like how many people do you think that is? They're like, oh yeah, well, I'll just have a podcast and it's just going to drive in the leads.
It's the start of most conversations. You want to have a podcast to build your brand authority and to build your thought leadership and to attract people. You don't realize that creating a podcast, getting it out into the world, and then promoting a podcast are two completely different activities that are going to take at least equal amounts of time and money. And that's even if you're able to get that initial traction to get going. So I think it's really important when you're kind of sitting down to think, okay, if you're a business owner, what does my business need? How can a podcast help me fill those needs rather than I want to have a podcast because it's a podcast and podcasting is the thing to do right now?
So how should business owners shift their mindset when approaching podcasting as a marketing tool?
I've got a little formula I like to use with people, for business owners. I call it podcast value math. And this is where you look at the things that are valuable to your business. Maybe it's new connections, maybe it's new ideas. If you're podcasting just, because you love it, maybe it's, new ideas that you had or times that you laughed. That's the part of the podcast that brings you value. That's what makes it worth doing. So then you look at kind of the process of podcasting, the function of it. What are the parts that bring those elements of value? Is it the time that you have talking to people and the relationship you can build because of that? Is it the content that you get that you can use and reuse and reuse? So then you've got, those are your first two variables in the equation. What is valuable? What creates that valuable? Now all you have to do is figure out, okay, great. How do I design the show or the workflows around it or all of the other things that I'm doing to make more of that value in the podcast? And if you've got 2 or 3 things that are valuable to your business, you can forget the rest because it doesn't matter because you're getting what you need out of the show. And because you've done your work and you've really identified that this is what's important, this is what's valuable, you can track those metrics and actually see how much value it's creating over time.
I love that. So now this is where you shine, designing the podcast for specific business outcomes. You've worked with clients who've, really shortened their sales cycles. They've
Yeah.
built the referral pipelines and even driven high ticket sales. So all through their podcast. So walk us through how someone can intentionally design a podcast for something like shortening the sales cycle.
I'm glad you picked that one. That one's probably my favorite one because I think it's one of like the unsung heroes of a business because it does so much for your cash flow, right? When the time that it takes from someone to become aware of you to actually decide to do business is much, much shorter. So what we're going to look at in that case is who is the audience and who are they likely to be when they first hear about you? And what are the ways that they are going to first reach out and get to know about you? Usually a podcast like this that shortens the sales cycle is going to come in probably step 2. They found you, they found their website. You're like, okay, this is kind of dealing with the problem I've got. They might reach out, send an email or open up a live chat if you've got one of those. And then you can say, amazing, I think we could really help you. Hey, why don't you check out these 2 podcast episodes that they're about people like you? Listen to those and then see if you want to take the next step. Well, they're going to listen to those 2 episodes. Probably they're going to, if you've got a whole season, they might binge it. They'll listen to a few more. Then they'll be like, either they'll filter themselves out and be like, nah, and you've saved your time. Or they're going to be like, this is the service for me. And then you jump on the phone with someone and you, as the business owner who has been doing this, you don't know this person from Adam, but they're just like, so we are such good friends. I am so excited to work with you. Can you do what you did for that other company for me? Can we get going? And it's this thing that's going to happen again and again when you deploy the episodes really early in that relationship building process that you're doing with a new lead. And it makes such an impact because it's such an intimate medium, right? That you're with them and you're helping them and you're maybe taking a ride with them as they're commuting or picking up their kids from school. And so they're ready to go when they jump on a call. It's really fun.
Now that we've have the shortened sales cycle, what does the show structure look like?
For this type of show, you can often get away with a limited release season. And I'll always recommend solo episodes for this, or if you're in a partnership with somebody, maybe co-host conversations. But there's going to be if you've got a good niche and if you know your client really well, you know what they're dealing with and you know the issues that are the most important to them. You know the questions that they ask again and again. So you can personally or with a co-host, if you have one, answer just those questions or deal with just those situations or provide just those case studies. And those can be really quick to get out because it is solos and you don't need to worry about podcasting forever because sometimes you just need 12 maybe 15 episodes to cover everything that, your actual ideal clients are going to care about. And you can just use them again and again and again, maybe refresh them every couple of years. So structurally, I'd keep it short, 10 to 15 minute episodes and maybe, 12 to 15 of them. And that can be a great starting place.
And this is one of the things I really want to highlight for all the listeners here. You're talking about having a show that's basically part of the sales cycle here. This is being used again and again and again for a purpose. This is very different than entertainment. So let's break down, let's just break down how these are different and why so many businesses fail when it comes to making this distinction. Because Joe Rogan's show and those true crime podcasts, those are very different than Rocky Mountain Marketing, right? They're very different. And my other podcast, Marketing Trends Now, very, very different, So let's just break down the purposes between these business podcasts and entertainment podcasts.
Definitely. So a lot of entertainment podcasts, they exist as businesses in and of themselves, right? Like the goal is to build a really big audience, attract a lot of people, entertain those people so that they listen and they come back again and again so that you can make money from sponsors and ads. And maybe you develop your own products and services around that. But it's a business that exists kind of together by itself. It's a standalone. As a business owner who is, if you're in marketing, you're in HR, you're a PR, you're a consultant, you're a coach, you're a lawyer, you have a business already. You don't need a second business unless you want a second business. But, this is a podcast that is designed to support you rather than stand alone as its own project. It doesn't need to stand alone and exist in the world. And it doesn't need to attract a really big audience to get a whole bunch of sponsors. For most businesses, the money that you'd make from sponsorship is nowhere near as much as you'd make from new clients or new relationships, new referral partners. So scope can be much narrower. And who you're talking to, you probably don't have 100,000 potential listeners. Maybe you've got 5,000 potential listeners, but they're all potential clients. And so I think the real differences are the ultimate goal of the show and what you're trying to do with it. And if you do want to try and monetize by entertaining people and by connecting people, which is a great goal for the record. You're going to have to do things that appeal to more people. You're going to have to spend more time promoting. Whereas with a smaller, more focused show, you can really just focus on connecting with the specific individuals who could potentially become clients or become another type of relationship to you.
And it's different. It's very different. Like you said, there's growing an audience, getting sponsors, and having those different end goals. So you have to have those strategies. And I think that is one of the struggles for a lot of businesses. Is like, well, how do I know what success is? That's one of the biggest challenges, is measuring a podcast success. Then like, oh, well, I'm only getting 100 downloads an episode. Like, how is this successful? And so let's talk about that. How do you attribute real success? Like, what should business owners be tracking if they want to tie podcasting back to revenue?
That's one of my very favorite topics as well. Because I mean, it can be so disheartening, right? Like, especially if you're a newer podcast and you're like, what, 37 downloads? That's not a nice number to look at when you're looking at your initial stats when you're getting going. And so I very rarely recommend downloads as a metric to track, but instead other things like how many people on discovery calls reference the podcast as part of the decision, or how many times were you able to refer to content on your podcast instead of having to answer something manually or have a member of your team do it. Well, that's time saved. That's profit earned. And so by tracking things like that, sometimes we'll also look at, if you podcast and you have a guest, you have an interview style show, how many of those guests then later sent you referrals? Or how many referrals were you able to send? What other opportunities have come up? Have you been invited to speak? Has your podcast been cited? Are you being talked about? So these are all different metrics that can indicate, okay, we're doing things, what we're doing is working. And they're almost all more difficult to track than downloads. But I really think it's worth putting in the effort to kind of develop the systems, maybe develop the habits or develop the team to collect that information, because podcasting is one of those things where it's really easy to not see the huge value it's creating because it's hard to track. But I think because it's hard is not a reason not to do it.
Full transparency. At Next Step Social, we just closed a client who's been a listener of the podcast for over 3 years.
Yeah.
He's been listening for 3 years, and I knew he listened every now and then, but said, well, yeah, I know about the 4-post strategy. Oh yeah, well, I listened to it. And then like, oh yeah, well, I know that when you say on the podcast, like, man, I had no idea you were listening to all the episodes.
Yeah, it was just happening.
Yeah. And I mean, like, they were an avid listener of the podcast, but they weren't ready to work with us yet.
Mm-hmm.
And when they were ready, we were the first person that they called. So what are some specific KPIs or systems that you recommend?
So some of my favorite ones are sales cycle length, as you talked about. And I mean, you've got to have some fairly robust tracking infrastructure. You have to already know what your sales cycle looks like to be able to track that. But once you start podcasting, start deploying it, you can see how that changes. And we've seen it, reduced by 50% in some cases. Very, very cool. Other ones I like are referrals. The number of referral partnerships that you have and the number of new clients that you get on the basis of those referrals. And you can just keep a track of who you have as a guest, when they have sent you referrals. And you just take that even a step further. If somebody's sending you a lot, have them back on the show. Do something nice for them. Keep that relationship going and invite more guests like them. So that's another one I really love. Labor cost savings, I think, is a really underrated one, because you're creating all of this content. It's really valuable. It's really useful. And you can use it in different ways. If you've got podcast content that can be teaching, that can be answering questions, that can be providing examples, that's all stuff that you don't have to do personally every week, or that your team doesn't have to do. And there's some front end on the work there, getting that set up and like really well indexing your content so you know what content does what thing. But once you've got that set up, it can be really, really easy to deploy. And another one that I really like, especially if you are maybe dreaming of sponsorship in your future, even if it's not for right now, sign up for affiliate programs and use your own podcast to share these, products or services, or even other people who have like referral bonuses or gifts. And then you'll be gathering data, not just about the amount of income that you're getting from affiliate, but what your conversion rates are like. How many downloads are going to result in this many click-throughs, and how many click-throughs will it take to get that kind of income? And that's super valuable when you do start having bigger sponsorship negotiations. So that's sort of the tip of the iceberg, but those are probably my favorites.
I love it. Well, and you've done a lot for business podcasts, and you've built some amazing resources. So you built the Business Podcast Blueprints and the State of Business Podcasting Report. So let's talk about both of those real quick. First, what are the podcast business blueprints, and how can they help someone figure out what type of show to launch?
Yes. So the business podcast blueprints are kind of the framework that we use to design shows. And there are ultimately 5 high-level reasons for a business owner to have a podcast. There's thought leadership, audience engagement, relationship building, content, and conversions. And when you podcast for a long time, you're going to get benefits kind of from all of those pillars. But it's important that one is the most important, so that you can have focus and so that you don't try to do a show that's trying to do 2 conflicting things. Within the blueprints, there's a whole bunch of different individual business outcomes or metrics that you can track. And as long as it doesn't conflict with your main business blueprint, you can pick whatever you want, mix and match, and design a show that really works for you. And so between downloads and referral partnerships and sponsorship dollars and labor cost savings, new content created. You can pick what's most important to you in your business, make sure that it fits under your blueprint, execute on it, track the results, and presumably podcast very profitably. And that's kind of what we learned over the first 5 or 6 years that we were producing these business podcasts. And we sort of distilled it down into this framework.
Cool. Very cool. So can you give an example of how someone might choose like a thought leadership show versus an interview-based like networking show?
Absolutely. So if kind of my goal as a business owner, if I decided I wanted to completely change my personality and then become really famous and really well known and build a huge audience, I might decide to have a thought leadership show. And for that, I would make sure that the types of conversations, if I have guests at all, I'm going to want to make sure that I'm having conversations with equals where, I'm not spending all of my time shining the light directly on them. I'm getting my own ideas out there, my own content out there. And sometimes I'm definitely doing some solo episodes so that I can kind of keep all of the spotlight on me and my company as well. And I'm probably going to invest more in external promotion because I want more people to see it. So I'm going to be sending that to, the bloggers that I know. And I'm going to be maybe investing a little bit in paid traffic for those episodes because the goal is to get more people hearing what I've got to say. Contrasting that with the relationship building show, ultimately the audience for that one is really the guest. Of course, the listening audience matters and you want to create good content that they're going to enjoy, but really you want to be building that relationship. So for that type of show, I'm going to think about the type of relationship that I want to have. Is it referral partnerships, collaboration partners, even potential clients, and seek to talk to people like that. And I'm going to invest a lot in making sure that the whole process is very smooth. I want them to know exactly what's going on. I want it to be very easy for them. I might do a prep call to make sure that, it's going to be a good fit. And I'm going to make sure that they are willing to invest the extra 15 minutes to talk to me.
Yep.
Before we go on. And then I'm going to, maybe do extra promotional assets, not because I expect them to share them, but to show them that I care and that I want to show them how well I want them to see in the world. I'm going to promote them on all of my platforms as much as possible, regularly over time. And so that's kind of where I'll put the focus. That's really, I guess, that can seem kind of quite similar on the surface. Maybe they're two conversational style podcasts, but they've got very different kind of reasons for existing. And there's a lot going on under the surface that's going to be really different about them.
So I have to say, like, I love your State of Business podcasting report. So what is one surprising insight from this year's research that made you go, that's really interesting?
Well, it's the most recent report I've got is from last fall. So we do it every autumn. And the one that has just started to surprise me the most, what would you guess, Katie, is the most robust and consistent result over time? We've been doing this 5 years now. That entire 5 years, the average length of a business podcast has been 44 minutes. Every year. And every year it gets more surprising. Maybe it's been a variance by 1 or 2 minutes, but it was just the strangest thing when we noticed that it was happening again and again.
What do you think, like on the length of podcast? People ask me all the time.
The data on it is interesting because it includes both like those 3-hour marathons with 4 dudes sitting around a desk talking about how much they hate carbs, and also like the 5-minute dailies, right? So I mean, it's an average, but the mean is pretty consistent as well, and it's around that 40-minute mark. And I think I found a lot of people like to have sort of a leisurely 45 minutes to an hour-ish long discussion. They tend to be people who are in more relationship-driven businesses. Where there's a lot, where it's really high trust, when it's really high emotion. So like your finance, your law, your HR, maybe, where there's a lot of feeling. Sometimes you need that extra time to let the episode breathe. I find the more practical shows tend to be a little shorter. And, if you've got something to teach, and if you've got, especially if you've already got like a really good presence and audience following, you can get it out in 25 minutes. You can give some real value. You can have a great conversation, and that can kind of be the end of it. And it comes down to audience too, right? Like, so if you've got an audience, say I was working with someone, her audience is mothers with young children. She can't do an hour-long podcast. No one's going to have time to listen to that. She can do maybe 10, 15 minutes per episode because that's how much time her audience is going to have to listen to things, when they're going about the day based on the type of show that we were talking about. For very new podcasters, try half an hour to start. The more experience you get, the longer you can go without getting boring or getting lost in the weeds. But I think err on the side of short would be my advice.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I had a past client that was very insistent on doing 2-hour long interviews a week. I'm like, no one's listening. They're too long. The data will tell you. If you look at the data, that it'll tell you what your audience wants.
I think it's a difference between entertainment and business is one as well, right? Like if you say, 2 hours on like some cool historical event from like the War of the Roses, I'm there for that 2 hours.
Well, okay. So let's say someone that is listening right now has been thinking about starting a podcast. I have not been able to convince them with the past 400 episodes of Rocky Mountain Marketing, but maybe today's episode is the one that's going to convince them. But they're unsure if the ROI is really worth it. What would you say to them, Megan?
I think the first thing I say is what's going to move the needle for ROI in your business? What is that going to be? Is it going to be making a bunch of relationships with people who could, become referral partners? Is it going to be just more people knowing who you are? Is it going to be engaging an audience that you already have? And then really try to think critically, can a podcast help me achieve that thing? Because I think what you want to avoid if you're considering a podcast is giving yourself a whole bunch of new work with an uncertain outcome. So you should try to make sure that what you really need for your business is something that a podcast can do. And if you're still on the fence about it, go be a guest on a couple of other shows. See if you like it. You can get a lot of the benefits from podcasting by being on other people's podcasts, and they'll pay for the production. And you can still do the relationship building. You're going to be doing it on somebody else's turf. You're going to have to play by their rules. That can be fine though, especially if they've got a similar goal. So if you're thinking about it and you're thinking, okay, a podcast could conceivably do what I wanted, like what I need in my business, go try it out and see if you like it. And then start with a short season rather than committing to forever. Start with 10 episodes.
I love it. Well, Megan, this has been such a great episode. I could talk about podcasting in every episode, but then I'd need to change the title of the podcast to Rocky Mountain Podcasting instead of Rocky Mountain Marketing. Okay, so before we wrap, where can listeners connect with you, learn more about you, grab your book? Tell us all the things.
The easiest way to get a copy of the book and to get in touch with me is at podcastingforbusiness.com. That's where that's where you'll find the report, details about the book and the blueprints. And if you are interested in production, we're at onestonecreative.net.
Megan, this has been great. If you've been thinking about starting a podcast, or if you already have one, but you're not sure if it's actually, driving real business outcomes, go check out Megan's work. I will link everything in the show notes. And if this episode sparked any new ideas for you, I'd love to hear about it. Message me on LinkedIn or, share the episode with a fellow business owner. Megan, thank you again so much for joining me on this week's episode of Rocky Mountain Marketing. Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of Rocky Mountain Marketing. I hope you're leaving with valuable insights and the inspiration to lead your market. If you've enjoyed our time together and found today's podcast episode useful, I have a small favor to ask of you. Please hit that subscribe button to stay updated with the latest episodes. And if you know someone who could benefit from these episodes, maybe a fellow business leader or an aspiring entrepreneur, go ahead and share this episode with them. Let's spread the knowledge and grow together. Also, I'd love to hear from you and continue the conversation beyond the podcast. Visit me at katiebrinkley.com to connect, to find more resources, or just to share your journey. And be sure to pick up your copy of my new book, The Social Shift, at katiebrinkley.com/book. Thanks again for tuning in. I'm Katie Brinkley, and I can't wait to dive into more strategies and stories with you on the next episode of Rocky Mountain Marketing. Let's keep on taking your marketing to new heights.